Good afternoon. So this is Matthew Henderson. I'm a program manager on the Azure Functions and Azure App Service team, focusing on identity and integration stories. And today we're going to talk about using Azure Functions and the Microsoft Graph together. Quick show of hands. How many folks are familiar with Azure Functions or serverless development? All right, about half. How many folks are familiar with the Microsoft Graph? OK, also about half. Was that the same half? We'll figure it out. So I'll kind of go quickly through some of the review content, but that's going to be the first part of it. We'll just kind of walk through what's actually in the graph, why would I want to use it, how do I even get started, and then how do we get started with Azure Functions? What is the benefit of this serverless thing that everybody keeps talking about? And then we'll put them together, and we'll figure out how to build a very, very reliable, scalable application that's working against our very important data. Does that all sound good? Cool. So the Microsoft Graph. Heard quite a bit about it already at Build so far. The idea is that this is where all of your data from Microsoft applications lives. This is where everything in Office lives. This is where all the things that you're doing with your enterprise mobility suite. All of these things feed into the graph and provide you with a rich set of data and insights on top of that data. There's a whole set of different APIs all contained within this one endpoint. And that's really powerful, right? Because it's your one-stop shop for everything Microsoft. They are constantly updating all of the different APIs that are available. In fact, there were just a bunch of new user management APIs, so you can do user onboarding in AAD. So those are all new. So the graph is a really, really powerful tool because, again, if you're going to be doing anything where you're providing a business application or something like that, go to where the data is. And the important thing is that we're going to actually start building an application that works with that data. And that's something that we can deliver as a third-party software offering. It's something we could do for our own internal companies. It's something we could do just for our own data. But the graph provides the actual entry point to it all. And then you get all of the nice benefits that come with it, right? All of the security management that we put in that Azure Active Directory, all of the insights, all of the actual webhook responsiveness that comes with the graph is yours for the taking. So, promise to be quick, so we're going to keep going. Azure Functions. We keep hearing this serverless term, and it's a weird term because it turns out in Azure, we don't just buy an empty warehouse and say that's our data center, no servers, right? The point is that we abstract away the servers for you. So you're not worrying about managing them, scaling them, keeping them up to date, and things like that. The platform just takes care of all of it. And with that, you get a lot of freedom to really focus on your code. It's also event-driven. And what that tends to mean is that you're not actually, because you're not managing a server, if you're not getting any events, we don't spin anything up for you, you don't pay anything. And we only charge you for the amount of time your code spends running. This is incredibly powerful. I've seen folks boast, actually it was a SharePoint developer, boasted over 100-fold cost reduction by moving his infrastructure over to serverless. That's powerful. When we talk about Azure Functions specifically, we're talking about taking a set of events, right? We're doing event-driven. That could be anything, right? HTTP, something in Azure, like uploading something to a blob store, a timer, or an event from the Microsoft Graph. Then we're going to run a piece of code, and that code could be in a number of languages. .NET, obviously very popular here this week, but also Node.js. We have Java support, Python's on the way, plenty of others. And then you don't just react to data. You're also able to influence other parts of your system. You're able to go right out to different data stores, throw something into Cosmos DB, send a notification through notification hubs, those types of things. So again, we're going to have these events. They're coming in as a certain amount of data that's bound. We have the code that actually executes, and then we have bindings to other data sources. Y'all want to see it in action? So let's very quickly create our first function and reload the portal because I left it hanging. Oh no. Oh no, network issues. This was not planned. Let's jump over to demo Wi-Fi. Yeah, I've got an adapter. Sorry, folks. Hey, that looks promising. Okay, let's try again. Maybe. So we're going to start in portal.azure.com, as we do with many things in Azure. And we're going to hope it loads. Logging in, that's a good sign. Excuse me while I vamp. Not sure what's going on. Give it one more try on another tab. So, what I was going to be showing was first creating an initial function. We're going to actually set it up so that we're going to use a blob store. So we're going to react to an image being uploaded to a blob. And that's going to set some context for how we work with bindings and how you actually get started creating functions. So I'll navigate into the function that I've already created. So we have a function app that's just a collection of functions that share some common code or config. And then while we wait for that to spin, we'll go ahead and hit new. And we have a whole set of templates for all sorts of different data sources and interactions and functions. I'm going to use blob trigger, and I'm going to use C# because that's what I'm most comfortable with. It asks for some parameters, right? Where do you want this to actually be? I'm going to copy this over so we can actually upload our image in a minute. And you notice the name is actually being treated as a parameter. Sorry, let me make sure folks in the back can see that real quick. So the name is actually being treated as a parameter so that we can actually pull that data into our function. And then we just have a connection string, which functions has one by default, so we're good to go. Go ahead and create that real quick. And then all of a sudden now we have a serverless function. So it's going to have a piece of C#, that's the code, and then the configuration for those events. So the portal is being really slow. Apologies there. But this is just how we go ahead and get started in the portal. You do not have to use the portal to work with functions. That just happens to be what we're doing with today. But you can work in Visual Studio, VS Code, whatever your favorite editor of choice is. So here's my function. It's pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is take a look at a blob, and we're actually breeding that in as a stream. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And then we're getting that name parameter that we talked about. And all we're going to do is we're going to log it. We're going to log the name of the function and the name of the blob and how big it is. So what's under the covers happening is we have this configuration. And this configuration is actually represented by a JSON file. You don't need to worry about that, though. We have a nice little editor here to make things simple. And it's all the same parameters we saw when we created. So I now have a function. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the logs so that we can see when it actually runs. And then I'm going to use the Azure Storage Explorer. If you are working with Azure Storage at all, I'm going to go and refresh this just because the network. If you're working with Azure Storage at all, you need to check out the Azure Storage Explorer. It makes things so much better. So we go ahead here, and we're going to go and see our blob containers. And you're actually going to see some stuff that's actually been created already. But I'm going to go ahead and create a new container. We're going to call it samples work items because that's what our function expects. We're going to wait for that. And then I have all of my favorite serverless product logos. And we're going to upload one of those, and we should see some logs show up. Now, one of the things I wanted you to notice is in our function, we didn't have to write any code to work with storage. That's the power of bindings in Azure Functions. So the idea is, hey, we see that we ran. We see that we have the name of the function is functions_color PNG, and then we have the size of it there in the logs. So I just got that data as a stream, right? But I don't have to treat it just as a stream, right? If I'm using a strong type language like C#, we actually have the ability to bring it in as any data format, and that's going to be important when we start talking about the graph. So now you just save that real quick and upload another one, and it works, right? I switched to a byte array that happens to have the same size property. I go ahead and upload another one. Function doesn't care. Didn't have to change any config or anything like that, right? So we have a lot of flexibility here, and we're not having to write storage code or learn how that SDK works. It's important. So we learned about bindings. Oops, I need to switch machines. So now, let's talk about Microsoft Graph bindings. So these are currently in preview, and the idea is that we want to actually make it so that you can do all the same types of things. Replace blob with OneDrive, right? So there's a whole set of webhooks which provide triggers for your functions, and then we also have bindings to let you just pull in data or write data back out. And it's a whole host of APIs. We don't cover everything, and that's important to note. if you need to work with APIs that don't have explicit bindings in Azure Functions, we have a token binding, and that's what we'll start with. And we'll go ahead and start building, we can start working with APIs, but we can abstract away all the authentication trouble, right? You don't have to worry about all that auth code to start working with the Microsoft Graph. So I promised the slides would be quick. Let's keep going. So we'll jump back over to our function, and we'll go ahead and create a new one using the Microsoft Graph. So we actually have a whole section of templates for this. If I go into the scenario tab up here and choose MS Graph, we actually have a collection that are around webhooks. We'll save that for later. But then we also have this one that's using the profile photo API. Now, we don't actually have a binding for the profile photo, but this template will show you kind of how things get working. Now, normally, when you first open this, you would get a prompt that says you need to install an extension. I'm skipping that just to save time because we only have a few precious minutes together. But you'll also notice I'm now getting a warning. And what does that warning say? It says, hey, you haven't configured everything with authentication. How somebody would actually talk to the Microsoft Graph, right? We need an AAD or MSA identity. So conveniently, there's a button here that just says configure AAD now. So I'm going to click it. We wait briefly. We're talking to AAD behind the scenes, making sure everything happens, and ta-da, all of a sudden my app is good to go. So we're now ready to start actually working with graph data. I'll go ahead and create this function, and we'll wait again for the portal to kind of get itself together. But the idea here is that I'm actually just going to be getting, you'll see a graph token passed in as a parameter. I'm just going to attach that to an HTTP request that I make to a graph endpoint. And the nice thing there is, again, I'm not doing any auth code myself. I'm just getting the token, attaching it to a request. So this lets me talk to any API in the Microsoft Graph, regardless of whether or not the binding has an explicit, binding for it. I'm sorry about the delay in the portal here today, folks, but let's just jump around a little bit and see if we can, oh, there it is. So you can see that I'm actually getting an HTTP request message and returning a response, right? So I'm actually just treating this as an API, and that's important, right? Because a lot of the applications that we want to be building with the Microsoft Graph are things that we want people to be able to interact with and work with their data, right? So I need to be able to have sort of that request-response mode where somebody's interacting with it. But then all we do is we spin up an HTTP client, we add the authorization header just to include that token, and then we call this endpoint. So let's take a look again at how that configuration looks. So the template helped us skip some of the steps, but we have, by default, the HTTP request and response, and then we also have this graph token binding, right? So we'll focus on that. So again, we see all the AAD config that we needed before, and we have a choice of identity. So right now, I can see that I'm using user from HTTP request. Again, we want something interactive. I want to work with the person who's communicating with my API. I could also choose to have my application have its own identity. That's the client credentials flow. User from ID and user from token are more advanced scenarios. We don't have time to go into those, but for the most part, you don't need them. And then we give it the name that it shows up in our function as, and we tell it the resource we want, and in this case, the Microsoft Graph. OK, so let's go back and run this function. But wait, you say, he hasn't logged in. You're exactly correct. We need to actually do that. And so we're actually going to work with Edge just to get all of our endpoints handled, and we'll keep the AAD session live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this endpoint. I'm going to call this /auth/login/AAD endpoint. That comes on your function app when you configure AAD authentication with it. You also see a query string parameter, prompt equals consent. We're going to be using that a lot because we're going to be changing permissions. And every time you change permissions on your user, you have to get them to consent to the new scopes that they're authorizing, right? So when I go and actually log in, so I don't have to enter my password because I'm already in the session, but the application is now saying, hey, are you OK with us signing in and reading your profile? And of course, I say yes. So then we're logged in. There's plenty of stuff about this. I actually did a full session yesterday that talks about sort of how these authentication pieces work. But then we'll go ahead and actually grab the endpoint. So I need to copy the URL of this specific function. And again, this function, all it's doing is grabbing my profile photo from AAD. Whoops. Just kill that tab. Grabbing it from AAD and then returning it to us. So with any luck, what we should see, hey, we get to debug live. So we got an HTTP 500. Let's see why that might have been. So first thing we want to do always is check our logs. And it looks like, aha, there was an AAD config change recently, and I forgot to make a change for it. So this is something that happened recently. We're actually working on fixing this in the functions portal. So when you click that configure AAD now, there's one parameter that needs to change. This is actually a good time to explain what happened under the covers there. We set up a feature called App Service Authentication Authorization that actually works with a whole bunch of identity providers. So you can see it already configured using express settings, this AAD application. And if I go in, I can actually get to the raw AAD application that I would see if I were working as an AAD administrator in the portal. I'm going to make a quick manifest change. And apologies, this is a very recent change that we haven't had a chance to account for. So this OAuth2 implicit flow, I need to change that to true. Hit save. We're going to give that a moment to get itself all propagated and warmed up, as you do with AAD. And then let's just do a login one more time just for safe measure. This time we'll do the exact same. And apologies, we've got, I know we're running a little low on time, so what we'll do is I'm assuming that webhooks are probably more of interest to folks than some of the other inputs and outputs. We'll probably just do one input or output and then move to webhooks really quickly after we show this one. So great, we're successfully signed in. Let's finally call this, and we should see my profile photo. Hey, it's me. So a very simple example, but this is something actually pretty common, right? Because within your own interfaces and your applications, you want to show the person's icon, in that nice little circle next to their name, right? So this is a good way of getting started and showing you how to work with a graph. And if you need to discover different endpoints in the graph, I highly recommend that you go play with the Graph Explorer at the Microsoft Graph website. This has all the endpoints, has test data, so I could actually go look and see, hey, my photo, that's not me, but it is a good representation of the type of data that I would get. I can even sign into this Graph Explorer and then work against my own data. And that's how I discovered, hey, this is how this API looks and what it expects. There's also great docs, but I like playing around with it. So we'll jump back over to the portal and work through our next setup. So what I'm going to show you is we're going to just show just reading data. So very quickly, I'm going to jump over to the Integrate tab and show you this Excel function I have. Again, we have Excel bindings, and you'll notice that, hey, all of a sudden, I'm getting a warning. Why am I getting this warning? Because I need more permissions. I need the permission to read user files in OneDrive. So we'll have to get that. You know what I can do? I can add that permission right now. So we're good to go on that front. Again, we're using user from HTTP request. And in this case, we're actually taking two parameters off of the API. So on the query string, I'm going to have the workbook that I'm using and then the table that I'm reading. And it turns out that I already have a table nice and set up. Well, first, let me show you the code, actually. While that loads, let me show you this table. So all we have is just a simple thing where I've prepared my demo script. And these were all the things that we're going to be going through. We're going to skip JavaScript support, and we're probably going to skip OneDrive output just for time. But if folks want, they can follow me afterwards, and we'll do it at the actual Azure Functions booth. So we're just going to do the Excel input one right now. So as soon as this function loads, let's just toggle away and back. OK, all we're doing is we're binding as a string array of Excel table data. Great. And then we're just returning it. That's it. This string array is very nice, good primitive type. I could also use a Microsoft Graph SDK type like workbook table. So all we're doing is returning that Excel table. So first, we're going to copy the URL out. And then we're going to remember that, hey, I changed permissions. I need to get consent again. So we're going to use that prompt equals consent flag. And then when I go to log in this time, what we'll see is, hey, it wants to read my files. Fantastic. I'm OK with that. So we're good. We're logged in. Everything seems to be good on that front. we're going to call in, and I've actually already prepared this in my history, so let's just show you what's going on there. So I have the workbook parameter, which is that build folder that I'm in the script Excel file, and then the fact that the matter is that I named that table 1. So we'll go ahead and call that endpoint, and what we should see is a JSON representation of that data, like that. So we can see it's all the same data that we had. We can see that that Excel input demo is in progress. We don't have time to change it, but if you do make those changes, there's a little bit of a propagation delay, but you can still see those changes coming in live. What you really want, though, is to be able to react to things, and that's where webhooks come in. So we'll do that one really quickly. And apologies, I know we're at time, so we're going to go slightly over. So in this case, I've got a function that is taking in a message. It's actually using the message type from the Microsoft Graph SDK. Fantastic. So now I can do things like check the subject, make sure that we're only going to react to things that come in with this subject and from me because, hey, demos. And then I'm just going to log the body of the message, right? So the trick is that I actually need a webhook creator, right? Because in the graph, I don't just have webhooks natively happening, right? The graph doesn't know that it needs to let that function respond to me getting an email. So what we're going to go and do is create an MS Graph webhook creator. There's also refreshing and deleting, which are very important for real applications, right? Because a subscription from the graph webhooks will only last for 3 days. And so you want to be able to refresh that. One of the things that we'll see, sorry, the portal just kind of hiccuped there. We'll go and do the webhook creator. And what you'll see is I need now to be able to read user mail. So in order to subscribe to a webhook, you have to have read permissions on the entity you're reacting to. We'll go ahead and add those now. I'm going to hit create. OK. And so all this is going to be doing is registering a new subscription, and then it knows to call back into functions. And then the function that we already saw will be ready to handle it. And we'll see that email come through faster than this portal loads. Hopefully. OK. At least I can grab the URL. Now, we did just change permissions, so one more time, we're going to go ahead and do that login consent. We should see read user mail come up. Yep, read user mail. Hit accept. So we'll be logged in. And we see this function. All it's doing is just going in, calling into the graph, and creating a new registration. That's what this binding does. We'll jump very quickly to our handler so we can see the logs. And we've successfully signed in. We're going to go ahead and create the subscription by running that function. Uh-oh. Well, since I am over time, I might not be able to troubleshoot this but so quickly. My guess is that we actually were a little bit faster than AAD, which can happen. No, it failed because client state, core. Yeah, OK. Well, apologies there. Because we're running low on time, if folks would like to just follow me back to the Azure Functions booth, I'm glad to provide that demo there. I'll be there for the rest of the day as well. So you just come say, hey, you owe me a demo. I'll be glad to give it to you. Very quickly, let's just wrap up what we covered. So there's a lot of power in the Microsoft Graph. There's a lot of power in Azure Functions. If you haven't been using Azure today, we actually already have a free, no credit card required trial. Great way to get started. And then these bindings let you focus on your app logic, right? We didn't have to write a bunch of code to go read things from OneDrive. We didn't have to learn a OneDrive SDK or anything like that. It just worked. And we use the Graph Explorer in combination with that token API, and we can cover anything that's in the Microsoft Graph. So thank you very much. There's plenty of great other sessions. Please evaluate. And thanks very much. Appreciate it. Sorry.